Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. Recently, the federal government presented its 2022 annual budget, the first since the new Liberal NDP agreement was minted just a few weeks ago. Indeed, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland has promised some treats for Canadians, but the budget is still thinner than had been expected. The deficit is expected to be $52.8 billion this year, and the debt is projected to hit a whopping $1.2 trillion by the end of the fiscal year. So what are some of the new funding promises? Well, they include a new dental care program, offering a tax-free first home savings account for first-time home buyers, and earmarking $8 billion for defense spending over the next 5 years. There was also a one-time business tax of 15% on banks and life insurers above $1 billion, which should generate some much-needed revenue. So exactly what did the budget contain? What does it mean for the average Canadian and Canadian family? For how long will Canada be running a deficit? And, of course, just how we're going to pay for it all. Well, joining me now for an analysis of the new budget is Kris Sims, BC Director at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and David Clement, North American Affairs Manager for the Consumer Choice Centre and a regular contributor here on Counterpoint. Welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining me. And I want to clarify one thing I said in the opener. I said that this new one-time business tax would generate some much-needed revenue. And that's not my opinion. It's much-needed revenue to pay for a lot of these promises, just so that we're clear. I'm not advocating for more revenue for the government. Anyhow, okay, so let's talk about that business tax. David, it's called the Canada Recovery Dividend, a one-time 15% tax on businesses. How do you feel Bay Street and will receive this, and how will businesses be impacted?
I mean, I think it's still unclear as to the extent of the impact. I think for those banks and life insurance companies, those costs are probably going to be passed down onto consumers or investors in some way, shape, or form. How that shakes out, we're not quite sure. And while I understand the need for revenue, what I would have much preferred to see is some sort of serious approach to spending reductions to help dig us out of this gap, because the tax increases, regardless of what they are, they do have diminishing returns at a certain point. And my concern is that the overall tax burden across the economy for ordinary Canadians right now is quite high. And so I'm not sure there is too much else the government can really sink its teeth into.
Do you agree, Kris? Do you feel, especially with this newly minted coalition, that we're just going to continually increase taxes, that the burden is just going to continue to be more burdensome on us?
Yeah, we do agree with David. It's a really good point that he's making. They need to dig themselves out of this hole. In fact, my federal colleague, Franco Terrazzano with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, is on the road right now with our debt clock. Our old debt clock, which used to look kind of like an old horse trailer that was converted and it had numbers in it, there wasn't enough room left in it to show the more than $1 trillion of debt that we're in. So now we have this huge new panel van with big screens on it, and we're trying to sound the alarm over the debt. And this budget does nothing to quell that alarm, because we're still going to be more than $1 trillion in debt by the end of this fiscal year. And they can try to put labels on it and say why they need to spend and where they're taking the money from. But at the end of the day, that number needs to start going down. They need to start reversing that debt. And so this is where we're pleading with the federal government, even if they went back to pre-pandemic level spending and then tightened up their purse strings a bit, they would be able to balance the budget within a few years. So we're not talking about drastic austerity level cuts here. Even if they went back to pre-pandemic level spending and were a bit more prudent, we'd be able to get within a balanced budget within a few years. But we're not seeing that. We're not hearing that in Chrystia Freeland's language. We're not seeing any formal projections, none of that. So this is where we're saying, folks, we need to pay attention here.
Okay, we only have 30 seconds before commercial, but one thing I like about the Canadian Tax Federation is they always bring the scale of the debt down to the family and to the individual household. 20 seconds, what is the new debt burden, or how much now debt is the single household carrying in Canada?
More than $30,000 for every man, woman, and child in Canada. So times 4 for a family of 4. Yep.
Wow, that definitely is burdensome. Well, we're going to unpack more of this budget when we return from this commercial in just a few moments. Please stick around. Welcome back. We're unpacking the 2022 federal budget, and joining me again is Kris Sims and David Clement. Kris, before the commercial break, we were unpacking a lot of the new debt that each household will carry. Well, let's talk about specifically the Canada Recovery Dividend. Again, it's a one-time 15% tax on banks and life insurers above $1 billion. What do you feel the impact will be in terms of maybe revenue, but also to businesses in general in Canada?
That's a great question. And so as David had pointed out, this will just trickle down. You can't just tax big businesses and hope that that stops there. Those big businesses won't just eat that cost. They pass that cost along down to you and me and the consumer. And so while it might sell well and say we're going to eat the rich or tax the big banks, that always ultimately trickles down to the little guy. And so we're worried that that will increase costs for people when they really can't afford more everyday costs. And we're very concerned that the federal government will just turn around and hand out this money in the form of corporate welfare to corporations that don't need the money. So we really need to get back to basics here.
Right, and we have had a problem provincially and federally in this country with corporate welfare, and something that's definitely very, very controversial. And many are suggesting that that should come to an end. We shouldn't be in that business. Some are saying though we need this one time. It says it's one time. Well, I guess I should ask you, David. Do you think it'll be one time? Do you think they're going to continue it? Any predictions?
I'm not sure if it'll be one time or not. The federal government, doesn't have a particularly good track record of having policies like this remain temporary, which is a problem. The big thing for me is when we talk about the banks, I mean, it's politically popular to go after the banks, but who are the bank's customers? They're people like you and I. Who are the bank's corporate customers? It's your independent grocery store, your local business, your restaurants, like the ripple effect there can't be understated. Is because all of us in some way, shape, or form rely on banking services and investment services, all of those things, and those that cost increase, whether one time or not, is going to be absorbed, whether it be through higher fees and all sorts of other measures that the banks can take to try and navigate through this. And so I'm not sure, despite it being politically popular because the banks are always made out to be the bad guy, I'm not sure that this is a great time to send another ripple through the economy as we've been trying to dig ourselves out of the impact of the pandemic.
Very good point. You're very good point. But, I mentioned that there are a lot of tax or program promises here, or there are a few big ones, namely the dental care program that was announced. Last year we had pharmacare, now we have dental care. So this program is supposed to start with 12-year-olds in 2022 and then expand, so under 12-year-olds, and then expand to under 18-year-olds, seniors, and persons living with disability in 2023. This is going to be an expensive program. Maybe this is where that money is going to be used. I guess, Kris, I'll put it to you. Does Canada need this program? I mean, dental care could be suggested that's healthcare. We do have socialized healthcare here. Should this have been expanded to include dental?
Well, I think we need to ask ourselves the question, how well is our healthcare system working? Do we want to make that our dental care system? Probably not a great idea. Do some folks need coverage for dental care? Absolutely. Is there a smarter way of going about this? Maybe they should try. Instead of trying to do the big government solution of putting in some temporary tax on rich people who will just magnanimously pay for it through their banks, and then handing it out to poor people who need the dental care, that doesn't work. This won't work. We know it won't work. The federal government struggled for years to even get their payroll software working properly for their own employees. So governments don't do a lot of things well, and we're very worried that this could simply become another big wasteful boondoggle and not get the care to the folks who really need it. And so instead, we would like the government to actually sit down with employers, with businesses, with provincial governments, and figure out a way to provide this kind of low-cost care to low-income people.
Well, it's a good point you raised. There already is infrastructure with many corporations which do have private plans. And the threshold is, for families 90,000 or less, that seems pretty high still to me. That was just my initial take on that. David, what do you think? Does Canada, well, we only have about 30 seconds, so we'll start and then we'll continue on after the commercial, but what do you think about that?
I mean, I totally understand the desire to help low-income people cover some of these bills, especially if they're in professions where they don't have that covered. With any number threshold, it's always going to be arbitrary. I mean, the average pre-tax income for a family in Toronto is at about that number. So you're talking half of families in the Toronto area.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there. We got to cut. We'll be right back. David, before the break, we were discussing the dental care program. And, you rightly pointed out that the average family in Toronto area, for example, their income is about where the cutoff is for this program. What about other areas in this country?
I mean, it's significantly lower in many other parts of the country, especially across the prairies and out east. The big thing, and Kris really hit the nail on the head here, and I'm borrowing from the Globe and Mail's Andrew Coyne, the pandemic has shown that the government is not good at doing almost anything other than dispersing cash. And if we want to talk about helping those who are in need, the best way to do it, whether we're talking about childcare or dental care for that matter, is probably to create some sort of system where you have that direct transfer and people are able to shop around rather than creating what could be a bureaucratic and very messy system that replicates all of the errors we see in our current healthcare system. A lot of people who go to the dentist, although I don't think many Canadians enjoy going to the dentist, the service that they get is genuinely pretty good based on the nature of how it's set up. And you could have a situation where a lot of Canadians lose that by virtue of how this program is set up. And so I think if we're going to talk about helping those in need and helping those in need cover dental costs, the best way to do it would be to talk about cash transfers and allow for people to shop around and have those who operate these dental facilities compete for that cash rather than trying to recreate some sort of system and having the replication of errors over and over again.
Okay, I want to switch gears for a second. Another one of the bigger line items, if you will, in this budget was defense spending. So obviously with the Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there has been a lot of calls to get up to the NATO 2% of GDP defense spending. This budget gets us to, sounds like 1.5%, not yet, but still below the 2%. What are your thoughts on that, Kris, to see this infusion of $8 billion over the next 5 years for defense?
Just that we need to be more mature and prudent in the good times so that we actually have money and stuff and good planning when bad times hit. We can't just kick the can for years over years in trying to procure these sorts of very expensive, admittedly, things, and then panic at the last minute and say, oh, whoa, my goodness, this stuff matters. We need money for it. If they were more judicious and careful with how they were spending for the past, frankly, 20 years, they would have had a better operating system for their defense. To give you an idea, we spend more than $25 billion a year just in interest on the debt. If you take a look at the line item for D&D, now it must not cover the whole cost of the military, I'm sure, but if you look at the line item in the last budget for D&D, it was about $23 billion.
Wow.
So we're spending in interest here more than that line item from that old budget in D&D. So the point here is that they got to be smarter about this. They have to be more careful with their procurement and actually work through it and find some affordability here.
And let's face it, one of the, we talk about roads and infrastructures, things we actually want the government to spend on. Dental care, probably not the highest priority for somebody. It could be, but, defending our borders, that is what we need the government to do. That is what we pay to do, maintain infrastructure, things like that. So let me ask you then, David, and I agree, there's been a lot of messes in the last a couple decades with respect to defense spending. Is $8 billion enough? Should it be higher?
It's probably not. It's probably not. I mean, the 2% number is arbitrary, but I would argue we probably have to spend whatever it takes to recoup what we've already given in regards to Ukraine, then meet the 2% number. Overhauling procurement is a huge task here because, I mean, how many headlines have we seen about fighter jets and icebreakers and other Navy vessels? And it just becomes this long-winded boondoggle because we have to have a certain percentage or certain things made here. I mean, we have great allies around the world. We've really come together in many senses in this crisis. We should rely on them for some of this procurement in terms of what we need to access militarily. So I think it's probably got to go up. The world is a different place than it was 3 years ago. And I think it's time to have an adult conversation about what our role is in the world, what we want it to be in the world. Do we really want to have our defense minister on national television saying that we can't send much more to Ukraine because we've exhausted all of our reserves and we can't arm our own military? Probably not. That's a really embarrassing moment.
Okay, we got to cut for a commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're wrapping up our discussion on Federal Budget 2022. A lot of interesting things in there, some things perhaps missing. One huge issue that is top of mind for many Canadians is housing and housing affordability. And we've seen pre-COVID, post-COVID, it's been an issue for the last decade for certain, and perhaps even longer than that. So what has the government suggested? Well, they're introducing a tax-free first home savings account, which would be good for first-time home buyers. And then they're also going to double the first-time home buyers tax credit. So that sounds like a good start. David, is it enough?
No, it's not even close to enough. I mean, those certainly help people get across the finish line. That's appreciated from the consumer side. Then they have a bunch of window dressing policy, like the foreign buyers ban. They're tinkering with demand, blind bidding, which would have no impact on lowering prices. The only supply side that they've really put in here is essentially an earmark of $4 billion to help communities grow quicker than the historical average, which is a grossly low bar. And their estimates suggest that that would build 100,000 houses. And in order for Ontario alone to get to the national average, and Canada ranks the worst in the G7 on this, Ontario alone would need 650,000 additional housing units. And so this is nowhere near good enough.
Wow, so it's not even putting a dent in it. And the other thing I thought was laughable was for this tax-free first home savings account, which sounded like a great idea. Like that sounds great. You're using your money, you're putting it somewhere, it'll grow. But the lifetime limit on contributions is $40,000 and your annual limit is $8,000. $40,000 isn't going to get you much house in Canada, is it, David?
No, it's not. I mean, average home prices in Ontario, I think, cracked the million mark, and in Toronto, it's 1.2 million or so. It costs you, in order to afford the median condo in Toronto, you need an income of 130,000. You need 180,000 in income to afford the average home. The average income for a family is about 90,000. So there's a huge gap here. $40,000 isn't going to make the difference. What we need is a real policy that's going to look at zoning reform to increase the housing stock of all shapes and sizes. Single-family homes, duplexes, multiplexes, condo buildings, etc.
Now, Kris, I mean, again, there were a lot of things listed under housing. We talked about that savings account, doubling the first-time home buyers tax credit. That's a good thing. Tax credits are good, I think. I think you'll agree. He mentioned multi-generational home renovation tax credit, ban on foreign investment in Canadian housing. What do you think? Do you think for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, do you see this as, okay, these are good steps forward? Should more be done? Or is there something in here that you don't like?
Well, it's basically like trying to bail out a bathtub and then dump the water back in the other end of it. It's just not going to do anything. And David is right. We have a supply side issue problem here, and we need to get rid of these gatekeepers. So the folks who are adding years and years of weight and red tape and taxes and fees and regulations that have strangled the building side of our housing market in Canada, those folks need to go do something else with their lives for about 10 straight years because we have got a serious shortage problem of housing. So just quick example, I'm from British Columbia, born and raised here. We're a two income family. There's no way we could afford a basic house here. Like, forget about it. And I'm Gen X. I shudder to think about what my kids are going to be dealing with because I've got a teenager now. She's going to be getting a job. She's going to want to start doing stuff like that. It's completely out of reach. And that just shouldn't be so. As Pierre Poilievre pointed out in his most recent video, 20, 30 years ago, an average family could own a nice home on one income. Maybe 40 years ago. That's just completely unthinkable in most places in Canada now. And one of the big reasons is government. And just to give you an idea, PST alone, just the provincial sales tax in British Columbia, which is applied on everything from the cement in your foundation to the shingles on your roof, adds around $27,000 in costs, building costs. Yeah, so that's just one tax.
And in Toronto, the average condo, on a new build, government charges account for 19% of the final price of when it's sold. So think about that. That's an inflation of 20% because the government is taking its cut. And some of it's necessary, obviously, to pay for roads and roads and sewers and all of that good stuff. But obviously, a lot of it is not, especially when you compare us to major U.S. cities where it's closer to 4.5% to 6%. And so there's a lot of money being taken out, a lot of money inflating prices, which is, like Kris said, pricing not just millennials like me out of the market, it's pricing Canadians across different demographics out of the market.
Okay, thank you both so much for joining me. We've got to go, and this has been Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.